On the edge of South America is nestled a steamy little corner of France. Its people can live, work, vote, and fight for France. But its story contains surprises, from colonial catastrophes to a tiny island of pain. This is the story of France's tropical, cursed colony, French Guiana. These videos tell stories of places and people as I try to find the echoes of the past in the world of the present. What is now French Guiana had a human population for at least 6,000 years and was historically the land of the Arawak and Carib people. And then the French showed up. First in 1624, but they were immediately booted out by the Portuguese. The first durable settlement by the French was established in 1643 at Guyane, and though they would lose their capital a few more times to the English and Dutch, by the end of the 1600s the French had control of their little South American colony. They would call it Guyane. It was the introduction of a whole set of diseases to the Amerindian population that cleared the way for the Europeans to take real control of the land. By the year 1700, according to the records we have, there were only some 30,000 indigenous left in the territory. According to historian J.R. McNeill, 100 years later, there were only 2,000. This is the devastation that was visited on the native people of the Americas by Old World diseases, which we discussed in a previous video. But in truth, the Europeans never really had a firm hold on the place. By 1716, there were still only 3,000 non-Amerindians in French Guiana, the vast majority of whom were African slaves. Even by 1760, Guyane, now the capital, and then the only thing in Guyane that could be called a town, was just some 150 to 200 buildings made of earth and wood, with a few inconsequential plantations around it. According to McNeill, in 1763, the French population in all of Guyane was 575 people. The colony, swampy and disease-ridden, was quite literally a backwater. More people died there than were born, and it was only kept alive by a drip feed of immigration. A 1749 official report described how Guyane had made little progress since its inception, and consisting of an inert group of derelict colonists has generally been a curse to the king. It was then that France had a proper go at turning Guyane into a profitable colony, wanting some base of loyal white settlers that could be drawn upon to protect its far more profitable sugar colonies of Guadeloupe and Martinique. Their target was Kourou. Between 1764 and 1765, depending on the source you read, some 12 to 14,000 settlers and military personnel arrived, mostly French, but also Swiss, Maltese, Irish, and Austrian. They were peasants who were told they were heading to El Dorado and promised free, fertile land and government support. Some 40% were under 18 years old. They arrived in the wet season, and in the words of John Gimlette, many of them would never again experience the sensation of being dry. The project was unprepared and incompetently run. Most of them having to sleep outdoors, they ran short of food, and they had no hospital. First, they melted in dysentery. But now the weight of disease that had fallen so heavily on the indigenous inhabitants would fall on the invaders. And once again, they had brought it with them. From the middle of 1764, epidemics ravaged the colony. Though exactly what killed them can't be known for certain, it is likely that the main culprit was yellow fever. Around 11,000 Europeans died in Kourou in less than a year. In 1765, they abandoned the colony. About 1,200 civilians survived and returned to France. A few others were scattered across the French Caribbean. That is a death rate of 85 to 90%. As McNeill put it, thus ended the single most abysmal failure in terms of total lives lost in the annals of American colonization. Up to this point, European settlement of the Americas had been relatively straightforward, with Old World diseases which the Europeans and Africans had developed decent immunity to decimating the native inhabitants. But now, throughout the 18th century, yellow fever and malaria epidemics swept through Guyane in wave after wave. So for a while longer, Guyane was pretty much forgotten. In 1809, the British took it and gave it to the Portuguese, but in 1814 it was given back to the French, who were still trying to figure out what to do with it. Like the other Guyanas, the French would grow sugar here, leading to the large-scale importation of slaves from Africa. It wasn't until 1848 that slavery was abolished, and almost immediately the plantations were reclaimed by the jungle. Though this did have the lasting effect of giving French Guiana its demography, with something like half of its population today having African descent. But the place was cursed. It was hot and humid and sickly. It was too far from the Caribbean, the trade winds blew the wrong way, and it didn't have a natural harbour. The tidal plain, a strip of 10 to 60 kilometres along the coast, was covered in grass and mangroves and was salty and sulphurous and unsuited to profitable agriculture. The French lacked the expertise in dikes and drainage that the Dutch used to turn their stretch of coast, what is now the countries of Guyana and Suriname, into efficient sugar plantations. So what exactly was this tiny little colony good for? Well, it's still French, and they would find a use for it. Specifically, something sitting just off the coast of Kourou. And one summer, I visited with my friend Dan to explore the steamy, tropical corner of France. We weren't sure if we could get a ticket for the boat, as we were told they were sold out, but after waiting around for a no-show, we got lucky. These are the Iles du Salut, or Salvation Islands, and for some 100 years they were the centerpiece of a French experiment in cruelty. For, you see, the French were still looking for a purpose for Guyane, so they tried something different. In the past, French prisoners served as galley slaves on prison ships that plied the Mediterranean. But with the invention of the steamship, they needed something else to do with them, something productive, and something that could save their souls. Why leave able-bodied men to rot in France? Why not make some use of them and give them the chance of redemption? Starting in 1852, French Guiana would be the chosen destination for the worst convicts of France. In 1885, the French Parliament passed a law that anyone, male or female, that had more than 3 sentences for theft of more than 3 months would be sent to French Guiana. Malaria, yellow fever, and dysentery were there waiting for them. It was, in effect, a life sentence, and for most of them, their lives didn't last much longer. There were attempted escapes, of course, but as one guard said, the real guards here are the jungle and the sea. Their experience in Guyana would start in Saint-Laurent-du-Maroni, near the border with what is now Suriname. This was the transportation camp. As John Gimlette describes it, a vast mill for processing people. It was here that they were sorted, losing their names and being given a number in pointlessly brutal work, digging holes or making bricks. Between 1858 and 1946, over 67,000 people passed through here. Few would ever make it home. In the first 30 years of the penal colony, over half died of disease. Even in the 1920s, the death rate was still 1 in 10. It became known as the dry guillotine, except that there was nothing dry about it. The rule of doublage meant that even after they had served their sentence, they would have to serve the same amount of time all over again as free men in France's colony. If their original sentence was more than 7 years, they were never allowed back to France. It was a long, slow death sentence. But some still managed to escape, and the French needed something else, something far more difficult to escape from. In the words of John Gimlette, across a narrow neck of water was a far less lenient island. It was geography much better suited to the infliction of pain. These were the Iles du Salut, for the political prisoners. The sea around St. Joseph is violent with strong currents. Try escaping from here. It was known as the man-eater. They were forbidden from reading or smoking. The prisoners would rape and kill each other. Many would wither away in solitary confinement for years on end. Of the 3 islands, this one is special. This is Devil's Island, a prison within the prison. Until 1895, it was where they dumped the colony's lepers. But then France needed somewhere to put the most radioactive prisoner of all. His name was Alfred Dreyfus. In 1894, he was accused of sharing military secrets with the Germans. He was accused because he was a Jew. He arrived in April 1895. He saw nobody except his guards, who were forbidden to speak to him. Meanwhile, back in France, his case tore France apart. The novelist Émile Zola took up his cause. It was a miscarriage of justice, he wrote, and the Dreyfus affair became symbolic of the struggle between the conservative Catholics and liberal supporters of human rights as France sought to define itself at the end of the 19th century. Eventually, Dreyfus was returned to France and freed and exonerated. He would rejoin the army, fight at Verdun, and die peacefully at home in 1935. But the system ground on. For France's liberals, Devil's Island became symbolic of France's pathologies, and they demanded it be closed. Internationally, it became a stain on France's reputation. In 1938, France's government announced that no more people would be sent there, and it would gradually wither away as the prisoners served their sentences, or died. And of course, today, it is a tourist attraction. Though there is a fancy hotel on the island, that wouldn't exactly be in keeping with the prison experience. So Dan and I opted for the simplest and cheapest accommodation, slinging our hammocks in the former prisoners' quarters after hanging up some of our damp washing from the night before. The island is swarming, above all, with agoutis.
It's got a deer butt.
Most of the things that make the island habitable now, like the paths, were made by the prisoners. I believe the same is true for these swimming pools, which allow you to bathe without being dashed by the surf onto the rocks. The biggest island is where most of the infrastructure is, but a boat goes over to Devil's Island once a day for €5. The restaurant, being the only game in town and this being France, was expensive, so our rations for the day were largely bread and peanut butter. Dan, who used to live in the Marshall Islands, sees if he's still got it when it comes to coconut trees. He takes the safe option. To stand and watch the waves break against the rock is to imagine what it would have been like for anyone imprisoned here, and knowing that, legally at least, they might never have been allowed home. There are also some pre-European leftovers on the islands, such as these carvings. And of course there are the cemeteries, a reminder of just how many lives ended on these rocks off the coast of South America. As the vast majority of visitors return to the mainland, after the last ferry of the day the island empties out, meaning we had the swimming spots to ourselves for a lie down and a read. We walked back to prison, with the place largely to ourselves. Without prisoners, Devil's Island has reverted to what it would naturally be, and there's not a lot other than the palm trees and the agoutis. What do we got with our chickpeas?
We got pesto, bread. And boy, are we excited.
In our hammocks, with the sound of the sea, getting to sleep was just lovely. The problem was the morning, when we had a steady stream of visitors. We had much of the day to relax until the return ferry that afternoon. That meant getting the best hammock spot early and settling in for a day of reading, crosswords, and snacks. We took a ferry back to the mainland, then hitched down the coast to a Carribbean, the only affordable accommodation in French Guiana, where for a few euros a night you can sling your hammock. Our dinner was even more plentiful than the night before. Camembert on bread, canned corn, chickpeas, plantain chips, some juice, and maybe some sardines. We'll see how we go on the sardines. France wouldn't wind down their colony of pain until after World War II. Even when they stopped sending criminals to Guyane, they kept the political prisoners there. Some would remain in the camps until 1963. France offered Guyane as a homeland for the Jews, though they opted for Israel. France still had no idea about how they would use their slice of South America. All the way through until its end, the prison system absorbed 90% of Guyane's budget. Even with prison labor, Guyane still wasn't a profitable colony. After 300 years of money and men being poured into Guyane, the population was still only 25,000. The landscape was barely transformed. The coastal strip was still a bog, and without slavery, there were barely any plantations. And that is the foundation of French Guiana, which became the Guyane we know today. But its story was very much not over. And soon France would find a very different use for it. It is that which we will explore in the next video.
3, 2, unité.